Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this very timely session titled Mediterranean Geostrategic Chessboard. Much to talk about, of course, very timely for those who were here during day one yesterday. A lot of pointers we're going to pick up from, but I couldn't have asked for a better panel to dive into these issues in just a moment. And when we talk about the Mediterranean, I think this is as good a time as any to remember and commemorate Mikis Theodorakis, a legend, a true legend, Greek legend beyond Greece, really, a cultural legend, an activist and thinker who passed away and who embodied in many ways what is so attractive to the outside world, to the Mediterranean. Culture, thinking, critical thinking, all these things that make up the Mediterranean. But of course, there's also realpolitik when it comes to the Mediterranean, some sticking issues, which we will, of course, dive into in just a moment. Stability in the Mediterranean, ladies and gentlemen, I don't have to tell you, is of vital interest to the EU. Just last year alone, the EU launched the Euro-Mediterranean Partnership, which aims really to establish peace, stability, economic prosperity, democratic values, and human rights in the region. Now, whether it is succeeding and what is the level of all those criteria on the ground, we will discuss this. And to my right, delighted to welcome our host, of course, the Foreign Minister of Slovenia, Anže Logar, and the Foreign Minister of Greece, whom I was supposed to introduce at this particular point, will be 20 minutes late. He will be joining us in just a moment. But I'm delighted to welcome the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Cyprus is with us, Nikos Christodoulides. Also with us is the Minister of State of Foreign and of Foreign Affairs of Portugal, of course, Augusto Santos Silva. And last, but certainly not least, delighted to welcome the Minister of Foreign and European Affairs of Malta, Evarist Bartolo. Now, let me pick up from yesterday's conversation, Mr. Christodoulides, because we heard yesterday from the leaders the topic that was on most people's minds and the main topic of discussion was really Afghanistan and the impact and ramifications that the tragic incidents in Afghanistan might have on Europe, but particularly on the Mediterranean, a region that already in 2015, in the aftermath of the refugee crisis of Syria, had already had to burden the heaviest share. Are you concerned, as Greek Prime Minister Mitsotakis was yesterday, he was saying 2015 cannot repeat itself. We as a Mediterranean region, we as Greece, Malta, Portugal, Cyprus, we cannot once again play the doorkeeper, if you will, to the rest. What's your take?
First of all, let me thank you for the invitation. I mean, our panel is taking place ahead of the next week first participation of Slovenia and Croatia in the Med7 group. And this is something that we are very happy to be joined by Slovenia and Croatia. I'm also very glad that you include Mediterranean in our discussions, because this is not always the case. And we're very, very glad that we have this opportunity. Actually, I wanted to make 4 points just to start our discussion, but one of the points is relating to the situation in Afghanistan and the repercussions not only for the countries in the region, but also for the European Union. And it's not only the migration issue that we face with the crisis in Syria. What is happening in Afghanistan is enhancing the perception in the region, because Cyprus is coming from the region. And when we approach the region, the Eastern Mediterranean, we have also the Middle East and the Gulf as a common space. I mean, Cyprus is 18 minutes flight from Lebanon. It's 40 minutes from Israel, from Jordan, an hour from Egypt. I remember 1 year ago when we had the explosion in the port of Beirut in Lebanon. We felt it in Cyprus. So what is happening in Afghanistan is increasing the perception in the region regarding the withdrawal of the United States from the region. And this creates a vacuum in the region, a vacuum that either the European Union needs to fill, or the like-minded countries of the region needs to fill, because otherwise we will see non-state actors or, let's say, extremist groups try to fill this vacuum. And the repercussions are going to be not only for the countries in the region, but also for the European Union. This is something that we need to discuss today. Do you have the United States withdrawing from the region or not? The second is the role of the European Union. As a European Union, we believe, and I'm sure that my colleagues share my approach, we need to do more as a European Union. To do more about the region, to show more interest about the region, and approach the region in non-neocolonial approach. The countries of the region, they need to have the ownership of the changes that should take place in our region. So we need to approach the countries of the region as partners and not as, try to dictate to them what to do. This is the second point that I wanted to make. The third point is that our region is mainly known for its disagreements, conflicts, problems. This is not the real story. There is another parallel story that like-minded countries of the region coming together, working together to face the challenges of the region, but also take advantage of the potential of the region. For example, 2 years ago, we had in Cairo the establishment of the East Gas Forum with the participation of 7 countries of the region, including Palestine and Israel. Sitting on the same table, discussing about the potentials of energy. So this is what I wanted to say as my first intervention, and I'll follow up.
Absolutely. A lot of food for thought that you have given us, and many pointers that we will pick up on, of course, most notably the U.S. absence from the region and its consequences. But let's stay on Afghanistan just for a brief more minute and perhaps dive into the ramifications of what it means to the region. Minister Logar, you were, of course, present at yesterday's opening. You saw how the leaders panel unfolded and what topic, at the end of the day, the discussion focused on, namely on refugees, on migration from Afghanistan into the region. You have the Mediterranean leaders here around you. Do you understand their concerns? Do you share their concerns when it comes to the issue of Afghanistan, the refugees, and the burden they had to share during 2015 and the aftermath?
Well, I guess we all here present share the concern. If you look political heat regarding the Afghanistan situation, I mean, there was immediate meeting of foreign minister in VTC format after Afghan crisis arose. There was a ministerial meeting of NATO. We have this topic on 2 informal meetings during our presidency today in the level of defense ministers and as well foreign ministers. So we are constantly talking about it, and I guess as well leader will in due course have discussion about European perspective how to tackle this question. Actually, in that sense, I see the vast difference than in the situation 2015, 2016. And it's an evident that 2 days ago, Minister for Interior Affairs agreed on a draft joint declaration when they clearly expressed European view how to tackle now this migrant crisis. It was unanimously adopted, and I think we have a very bold text regarding the issue. However, definitely the countries of Mediterranean geostrategic position will face strong pressure from the migration side. And for example, learning from past mistake, Greek Minister for Foreign Affairs can tell you we have already 40,000 Afghan migrants in our camps. We will not let any more for take in, because this would be definitely too heavy burden for taking over. So we all have a lesson learned, and we all in a way redrafted or prepared a new way, a new strategy for the tackling the issue. And this topic definitely is not something that we already got into the conclusion. I even expect that there will be some consequences that will face us in incoming days that we will have to instantly reply to them.
No doubt. This is an issue that will be with us for the next few weeks and months to come. No doubt will dominate one of the agendas in European politics and the Mediterranean in particular. Let me bring on Minister Bartolo, because Malta, again, a relatively small country, but yet also been home to many refugees throughout the past few years, evolving from conflicts around its region. How worried are you, how concerned are you about the situation evolving in Afghanistan and the ramification it might have for your country?
I would be worried even without Afghanistan, let alone with Afghanistan, because at least I hope that one of the biggest lessons that we learn is not to repeat the same failure there, which I see potentially happening in Libya and happening more in the Sahel. And you cannot have stability in Europe without stability in the Mediterranean, without stability in Africa. You were asking about whether America is leaving a vacuum. A few weeks ago, there was a geological study published showing that the continents of America, Europe and Africa are actually drifting apart. So even geologically, about apparently 4 centimeters a year. I think politically it's happening at a faster rate, more than 4 centimeters a year. And I think that is worrying. Especially I feel that when it comes to Europe, it's as if we are letting ourselves be impressed that the most important geostrategic theater of the 21st century is not in the Mediterranean, it's not in Africa, but it's in the Indo-Pacific. I'm not saying that the Indo-Pacific is not important, but this obsession that the 21st century is the century of Asia, I think is not completely correct. It is the century of Asia, but it's also the century of Africa. And unless we keep that in mind, we're going to have huge, huge problems. The blessing of Afghanistan is that you cannot build a nation from outside. You cannot impose a society from outside. However well-intentioned you are, however much you want to develop a democratic society, gender equality, I'm not saying that those are not important, because I think we should really work for the core principles of the United Nations Charter to spread around the globe, something which is in retreat. Let us admit that democracy is in retreat. But to build a house from the roof down is not wise. And that is what happens. And I hope that we learn, because we have the problem that in Libya, the same thing might be happening. So let us build houses and help to build houses. I don't come to build your house. You know, I can help you build your house. You decide your design, you decide how you're going to build it. Even if I don't like it, I can help you. And the same, we must do that, because otherwise we are going to have a serious problem. Because in the central Mediterranean, the rate of immigration is very, very high. If our Italian colleague were here, he would have a very dramatic story to narrate with what is happening from Tunisia, Libya. Let us not forget all this.
Absolutely. Many lessons to learn from Afghanistan. Perhaps that nation building does not work at the end of the day after 2 decades of NATO presence there. But the ramifications are still there. The consequences, Minister Silva, for Europe and the Mediterranean region is real. It's playing out in front of our very eyes. It is a very dynamic, evolving situation. How concerned are you? How worried are you?
Well, I think that it's our responsibility as Europeans, as the European Union, as the European partners in the NATO framework, to address our responsibilities. And we had 3 responsibilities in the aftermath of the occupation of Kabul by the Taliban. The first was, I think, completely accomplished by us. It was to expatriate, to evacuate our own citizens. That is done. The second one, it was an issue of honor. It was to protect the exit of those who had cooperated with us, with international forces, and because of that were vulnerable to Afghan attacks and persecutions. And we are still working in protecting these thousands of Afghan citizens. And then we have a third responsibility, is to provide humanitarian assistance to those who are specifically vulnerable because of the Taliban ideology and regime. I'm speaking of the activists for human rights, women that were judges or prosecutors and took very courageous and important decisions in their responsibility during these 2 decades, and also other groups that are vulnerable and need international humanitarian assistance. So before speaking of migration flows, the risks that they pose, and so on, we have during this September to organize ourselves to respond to this responsibility.
And how optimistic are you that the EU will rise to the task?
I'm quite optimistic. I think that at the end of the day it will be done on a volunteer basis. I don't believe that the 27 member states will join together in this effort, but I do believe that we learned lessons from 2015 and we will not let Malta, Cyprus, Greece, Italy, or Spain alone.
All right.
So we need a sense of responsibility is, of course, one basic obligation of all of us.
Mr. Christodoulides, the lessons we've learned from 2015, we won't leave Greece, Italy, Malta, Cyprus alone, says your Portuguese counterpart. Are you content with what you're hearing?
No, I'm very glad to hear this from Augusto, and I will remind him in case we need help in order to deal with the migration issue. But I think we need to add in our discussion one important element. Instead of discussing just the consequences of what happened in Syria, in Libya, in Afghanistan, if, as European Union, we are not going to deal with the root causes of this phenomenon, we are not going to face migration. We may face the consequences from Syria for 2, 3, 4 years, but then we're going to have another crisis, like Libya, like Afghanistan today. So as a European Union, we need a comprehensive approach and policy for all, for the Mediterranean, which is, at the end of the day, it is the neighborhood of the European Union, in order, first of all, to face the root causes.
What are the root causes, according to you?
I mean, climate change, we're discussing. I mean, you cannot discuss migration without touching on climate change, the political situation. Very, very correctly mentioned gender issues. So you need a holistic, comprehensive approach in order to face the problems of the region.
So you're saying we're focusing on the wrong issues, even here now. We're focusing on refugees.
No, it's the consequences, and very correctly that we're discussing the consequences, but if you don't face the root causes, right. Even though I'm sure and I'm optimistic that we will find a solution to the migration issue, all member states, they will get some migrants, but that will not give a solution to the problem if we don't face the root causes.
And the root causes, of course, we will come to throughout this discussion, the remainder of time, but very correctly, of course, climate change, many of the issues that you've mentioned. Let me just take the opportunity to welcome Foreign Minister Dendias, who just joined us. Lovely to have you with us. I want to give you a chance to respond to our opening round, because as a matter of fact, the opening round of questions was kicked off by the statements that your Prime Minister made yesterday during the leaders' panel, namely that 2015 under no circumstances can and ought to repeat itself when it comes to the refugee situation and the evolving situation we're seeing in Afghanistan. And we've been so far discussing about that the lessons, more or less, that's what I'm getting from the gentleman, have been learned. The lessons from 2015 have been learned. Countries such as Greece, which has bared a huge burden in taking on a sizable number of refugees, will no longer be left alone. Are you optimistic that this time the sense of solidarity will be higher?
Well, first of all, thank you for the welcome. And it's very good to know that my Prime Minister's comments have been really the basis of your discussion. That's quite interesting. Well, honestly speaking to you, the 2015 events were for Greece and for our society, and I think for Europe as a whole, a rather traumatic sort of impact. Because it was not just irregular migration per se. It was not just migratory flows per se. It was the first time we have seen the instrumentalization of the migratory flows. Really, our neighbor Turkey pushing migratory flows towards Greece and towards Europe in order to achieve goals completely different, political goals. So, having said that, I don't see that Europe right now is facing, as we are, the same threat. Nevertheless, it is very useful, and I have to say that it was very useful that Prime Minister Mitsotakis did that, to underline this to all actors in the region, to underline that this is something that we will not accept. We will not accept this time. One problem is the crisis in Afghanistan per se, created by the Taliban regime, by the situation on the ground, and another thing is to manipulate the situation in order to achieve political goals by other actors.
Thank you so much for your reply. And let's dive a bit deeper now and want to pick up on something that's already been mentioned, namely the disengagement from the US in the region, which has created undoubtedly a vacuum. At the end of the day, we see that a vacuum anyway, will be filled by someone, whether you like it or not. And new actors in the region have emerged, and new power struggles are playing out in the Mediterranean. We're just seeing Russia, more or less, has cemented its place in the region due to its role in Syria and Libya. And even China, through its Belt and Road Initiative, is now a major economic player with stakes in ports such as Piraeus. For instance, Egypt, UAE, Saudi Arabia, many countries are advancing their interests in the region. Minister Christodoulides, it's getting crowded.
You know, we welcome everybody in our region. Look, indeed, I mean, it's not a new phenomenon, this US disengagement. It started long before. And that is why a few years ago, together with Greece, we started working with the countries of the region, coming together, always based on a positive agenda, in order to fill this vacuum, to face the challenges of the region, but also to take advantage of the potential of the region. Energy developments and energy potentials of the Eastern Mediterranean, it was a trigger point that we start discussing with Israel and Egypt. But very soon, all of us, we understood the benefits out of this cooperation. And now we're discussing almost with all countries in the region. It's Greece, Cyprus, Egypt, Israel, Jordan, Lebanon, Palestine, UAE, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, working together in order, as I told you, to fill the vacuum, take advantage of the opportunities, but also face the challenges of the region. And you know, we have also a long-term vision. Probably we are not going to be in politics when this vision will be possible to take place. You know, our region is the only region that there is no regional organization. So we're working in order, when the political conditions are there, to establish a regional organization on security and cooperation in the Eastern Mediterranean, which we believe that right now all the countries in the region, they see the potential. And I want to finish by this. We are working on a positive agenda, and we don't exclude any country as long as it respects international law and good neighborly relations.
So we might have to rethink the concept of who is the Mediterranean country at the end of the day, and which brings me to you, Minister Logar, of course, because as Minister Christodoulides said, Slovenia is now partnering up with the region. What is the allure to you? What is the draw for a country like Slovenia to be associated with the Mediterranean region, politically speaking?
The most evident is that we're a Mediterranean country. And another one is that the countries from Mediterranean more or less face the same problem. I mean, you mentioned the migratory pressure 2015, 2016. Well, one should mention as well Slovenia. There were 500,000 migrants passing Slovenian land then. And those pictures, you know, they were very, let's say, the narrative of those pictures was very strong, and it's still we are facing this. And for example, we spoke with, when I visited Evarist in Malta in March, he was explaining the situation of migratory flow from Libya and how, in a way, Malta was let alone to conclude its, let's say, bilateral deal in order to fight illegal migration. Now it's okay, because they did it. And if you look, all those countries, now 9 Mediterranean countries, well, voice of 9 Mediterranean countries within the European Union would be quite substantial if we stick to the same thoughts and we try to present them. So it even enhances this, let's say, regional and geographical and strategical position we have, and that all comes with that. So,
and do you see a unity? Do you see a cohesion among those states that you mentioned?
Well, I see unity because they adopt Slovenia and Croatia to join them. So there was a unity. They agree upon that. But just, can I have a slight intervention when you mentioned vacuum, that there's no vacuum in foreign policy, which I completely agree. And coming back to Afghanistan, what we are facing now. I mean, if we look back, first a Russian intervention, then Allied forces intervention, they went in with military equipment to fight with somebody. They all failed. Now we have third, apparently, attempt that somebody is coming with a, let's say, pocket of money, with intention to investment, and not fighting against somebody, but supporting somebody in their building new government there. And this will be very interesting to follow if, in case this kind of attempt succeed. This will be very interesting.
Yeah, the absence of the US, Minister Silva, that we're seeing, not just in the region, all across the world. I think throughout 4 years of Trump, many of us in Europe perhaps fooled ourselves thinking that it's an exception and we're going to go back to transatlantic relations, as it were. Now we're seeing Trump wasn't an aberration. I mean, at the end of the day, the retreat is also being advanced and sanctioned by President Biden. How concerned are you? Because we said it creates room for many new actors who have different stakes, different interests in the region.
Well, I must say that we didn't oppose the retreat. In fact, we decided as NATO members. We criticize our own efforts, Americans included, in respect to the way the retreat was not organized. This is the criticism. And of course, I subscribe to all Evarist said about the global lesson we have to draw from our experience in Afghanistan. But the Mediterranean area is not only Afghanistan and the Middle East. And in what regards our relation with Africa and our responsibility vis-à-vis current developments in Africa, the political crisis in Tunisia, the chaos in Libya, the very severe and troubling disputes between Morocco and Algeria. These are our direct responsibility of Europeans, not the Americans' responsibility. And we have instruments. We have the Union for the Mediterranean, in the framework of which we can advance practically and effectively with programs of cooperation with North Africa that will be very, very important concerning energy, concerning higher education and the qualification, the training of youngsters, and concerning also the organization of regular and legal flows of migration. We have the experience of the Council of Europe and the North-South Center. We have our new agenda for the Mediterranean that we approved in Brussels last year. So this is our direct responsibility of Europeans. We cannot wait for the Americans. This is our neighborhood. We have the new instruments, the Europe Global Europe, so a new financial instrument to support many of these countries in the Sahel, for instance. So this is our work, our task. It's not the Americans' task.
At the end of the day, we have to solve these issues just laid out by Minister Silva. I cannot look towards Washington to solve them for us. Mr. Bartolo, you were nodding. I would assume you're in agreement.
Yes, and what Nikos was saying about the Eastern Mediterranean, unfortunately, I think cannot be said about the Western Mediterranean or the Central Mediterranean. The kind of links and strong links that have been built between both shores are not on our side. I agree with Augusto that there are structures, but considering the big challenges that we have, they are still very weak. They are there, even when we meet as 5+5, which is our sort of version of getting the two shores together on our side. We meet sporadically, the meetings are short, and we don't really build these kind of institutional links. It might sound a crazy dream, but I'm encouraged to talk about it because Nikos mentioned something on that basis, which is, I think it's time, I know it's very difficult, to call for a conference on cooperation and security in the Mediterranean, in the Helsinki spirit. And we might be in time to do it in 2 years' time, when it's the 50 years anniversary. When that was suggested for Europe, very few believed that it would lead to anything. But we need to do it because we don't work together enough on both shores. We're meeting here. It's interesting, we have no one from the other side. At the present moment, there are foreign affairs meeting in Algeria. There is no one from Europe. We need to create a forum where we meet our colleagues much more. The Eastern Mediterranean teaches us about that. We need to do that. We need to do that not romantically to reach across the two shores, but because we need to do it. And if we don't do it, others are already doing it. I must stress 2 points. The big challenges ahead. Take the demographics. I keep on mentioning the demographic suicide of Europe. See what's happening in Europe in 30 years' time. Babies being born now. When they are 30 years old, we live in a world where there will be 2.5 billion Africans and 500 million Europeans, mostly middle-aged and old, whereas in Africa they would be children and young. What is going to happen there? Unless there is a very strong economic growth and people who are born there live there, the pressure is going to increase. Number 2, the push for climate change, it's very important. We live in a zone which is warming up 20% more than the rest of the world. We saw this summer, I'm sure our colleagues can talk about wildfires, drought. But what is also, apart from this, let's remember that 1/3 of the oil supplies in the world come from this region. So if we're moving towards decarbonization, we're not simply asking people to change their behavior and instead of having a petrol or a diesel-driven car to go for electric. These are countries. Their social and economic structures are built on oil. So for them to change the business model and the social and economic structures that they have, it's a huge change, which will bring instability if it is not planned and financed well, and we take the people together and those countries together. So there is really a lot of work to do.
Yeah, much work indeed. Climate change, a huge issue, of course, pertaining not just to the region. As a matter of fact, the parallel session on climate change taking place, we might tear the wall down and have a round discussion here. But it is very serious, of course. Foreign Minister Dendias, we saw it in Greece with the wildfires, and at the end of the day, this is an issue that's not going to go away. Minister Christodoulides already even said climate change is the root cause. We're just talking about refugees, but at the end of the day, the root cause is climate change. We have all those leaders here on the stage. Why isn't the region at the forefront of this? Why isn't the region, each of you individually, I understand it's not going to work, but hand in hand, why isn't the Mediterranean a leader running forefront when it comes to climate change?
First of all, let's remember that just a few years ago, we could even say a few months ago, there were people, and serious people, and maybe leaders of countries, denying the existence of the phenomenon. saying that this is nonsense that we're talking about. And speaking about climate change, what we're doing is that we're creating obstacles to economic growth. So the first main thing is for our societies, because also again, be frank, let's just be frank, the politicians respond to what their societies want to what their societies believe. The first main thing is for the societies to understand how big a danger the climate change is, how big the threat is and how big the challenge is, create a new maturity, and from there move on. The Mediterranean could be a perfect example of cooperation on addressing climate change, exactly for the reasons that Evarist said before. It affects our life, it affects our everyday life, and it's not only the wildfires. Wildfires was something very threatening, but it's not the only one. So, if I may say so, if there was something useful from the wildfires of this summer, is that I think almost the totality now, not just the huge majority of the societies around the Mediterranean, understand the magnitude of the challenge. And this is fertile ground to work together on addressing it. Will it be quick? No, it won't. But I think it will be quicker than anticipated if we had the same discussion, for example, 2 years ago.
Yeah, I would say the momentum probably when it comes to climate change is at least in the right direction, in that it is more and more on political agendas, on agendas of conferences like these. And I believe the deniers that Minister Dendias spoke of, Minister Silva, are getting less. Or is that wishful thinking on my part when you are meeting with your counterparts?
No, it's perfect that in words we agree more than we used to do. And we have plans, now it's time to implement them. And this is all that is about the COP26 in Glasgow. We need action plans. We need action plans that can effectively address the climate change. So something positive has occurred last year. First of all, the fact that the new American administration put the climate change and the climate agenda as its very first priority. The fact that the Chinese finally committed themselves to a target towards 2060. The fact that in the last European leaders meeting with Prime Minister Modi, it was important, it was possible to reach a common declaration also on our common commitments in respect to the Paris Agreement. So time is to transform all these declarations into action plans. Europe is leading by the example, as it is its responsibility. The so-called Fit for 50 package is a very challenging and demanding one, because we have to tackle the economic consequences, and we have to reach a balance between the need to fight against climate change and the need to preserve the economic foundations of our society. But I think Europe will get the legislative package that we are preparing by the end of this year, and this again will preserve the leadership of Europe. So I think, again, it's time to implement. And the fact that we live in the Mediterranean and we work, the two shores are used to work together, it's really an opportunity, because if you think of renewable energy, and if you look of the vast opportunities of Algeria, Morocco, Mauritania, Tunisia, Egypt, in terms of solar energy, you can easily convene a common cooperation program that can build up the institutional and technical capacity of those countries and preserve their position as big suppliers of Europe in terms of energy, as, for instance, Algeria is, at least for Portugal, but transforming from gas into solar.
Clearly, the plan is in the works, says Minister Silva. It just needs to be implemented. Sounds easier than done at the end of the day. But Minister Logar, when it comes to climate change, it's clear that even if Europe takes the leading role, without India, without China, without the US, of course, the change that is necessary is not needed. Nevertheless, do you see a chance for Europe to be a role model here? Do you see a chance for Europe to lead the way?
Well, it depends on what you have in mind with the word Europe. Does it mean political Europe, European Union, political elite, or let's say in a way of a movement that we are trying to impose with this Fit for 55? You are very correct when saying even if we do everything, even if we halve our CO2 exhaust, that would on a global level mean only 4%, so practically no substantial change. China, India, United States, they are way ahead of us in exhaust. So first of all, they shall see that this is the way how development should take further. And here, I think, where all European interlocutors or actors stepped in. For example, during my visit in Copenhagen, I spoke with the chief of European division of Maersk, so the biggest logistical ship vessel company. They have more than 700 vessels around the globe, and they are turning completely into the green. So they are substituting the old ships to a new one on bio or green energy. And not only that, they are putting forward, let's say, requests for the ports they would like to take as the ports for their vessels. So they, as being so strong, they have this power to impose a green policy to other continents. And if, let's say, all those actors, he has that power, take this as a policy in their strategy, I think Europe can prevail, yes.
And that is, of course, the hope on the part of many who are observing the situation, monitoring very closely. Of course, we're talking about climate change, we're talking about the absence of the US, we're talking about Afghanistan, of course, and the ramifications of that conflict. But the one topic that has been occupying our thoughts, minds, and actions for the past 18 months is the pandemic, of course. I want to talk a little bit shortly about the cooperation, or lack of cooperation, perhaps even, in the region, in the Mediterranean, when it came to pandemic measures taking place. Minister Christodoulides, how do you assess the previous 18 months when it comes to helping each other out, assisting each other, informing each other? Have you been satisfied with the level of cooperation amongst Mediterranean countries throughout this health crisis?
You know, it was very, very challenging for Cyprus. There was a lot of criticism, especially towards the European Union at the very beginning, but I think in the long run, the European Union came together, working together, and I have to say, coming from a small country of 800,000 people, it wouldn't be possible for us to have vaccines if we were not a member of the European Union. And we have to admit this, because, you know, as politicians, we like most of the time to, for all our faults, to criticize Brussels. And when we achieve something, we say it was because of our national policies and national government, and we need to acknowledge this. But if it wasn't the European Union, for us, small member states, I think it wouldn't be possible to face the pandemic. But it was very interesting that we worked closely with Israel, Egypt, Greece, in Austria at the very beginning to face the pandemic. Right now, we are at approximately 80% of our people fully vaccinated. Today, the Council of Ministers decided that we are going for the third dose for those over 65. I think, yeah, the pandemic is not over, and we need to continue working together in order to face the challenges.
It's not over. I'm looking at an audience with masks on, so hopefully come next year we will have a different sight altogether. Minister Dendias, aside from being perhaps satisfied about the level of cooperation and assistance throughout this pandemic, are there any lessons to be learned for the region when it comes to...
A very clear one. We can achieve something if we work together, and if we don't work together, nothing can be done. I mean, we're also a rather small country. Yet again, we helped North Macedonia, we helped Albania. As we speak now, there's a Greek airplane flying to Rwanda with vaccines. We are sending vaccines to Tunisia early next week. We have sent vaccines to Kenya. Why? Because we all understand now, not just Greece, we all understand now that unless we help each other, the pandemic will come back knocking at our door. So the one thing that humanity has gained is that we are too small to pretend that we can live within walls. No. We are a unity and we have addressed common challenges as one, as humanity. I think that is the positive element for this from this dreadful pandemic.
Minister Bartolo, does that echo your experience? Is that compatible, what you just heard about the cooperation?
With what is being said, but we are in the same storm, but we're not in the same boat. Because some of our boats, and Malta is one of them, are strong enough to survive. I mean, we have more than 92% of our people vaccinated, and we're also working to get the third jab. But we know that very close to us, and I'm happy that Nikos mentioned the support that Greece is giving to Tunisia. Tunisia is one of the worst hit countries in the Mediterranean. We've sent supplies there as well. We've sent to Libya. But please let us remember that we're talking about an African continent where less than 2% have been vaccinated. So yes, while some of us are moving ahead to give the third inoculation, other countries haven't yet managed to give the first. So it is showing the inequalities that we have. It is also showing how crazy the human species is. Because last year we found billions to modernize nuclear weapons, and also for countries who are struggling with COVID to reach arms deals. But they didn't have money for vaccines and for their health systems. So we should reflect about these things as well.
And I think it's very clear, Minister Logar, the one lesson clearly we've learned, no one's safe until we all are. Therefore, the short-sighted approach to saving Europe, if you will, and getting everyone vaccinated, of course, is going to fall short in the global context. How do you assess the previous 18 months from a position of cooperation amongst neighboring countries and Mediterranean countries when it comes to the health crisis?
Well, I think putting aside the response capability of European Union, of member states, where there were much already told about that, but the consequence of this pandemic is, I think, and I witness, it's strong solidarity. Even Slovenia, for example, we exported medicine to India. We are small, 2 million, there are 1.4 billion. To Egypt, to countries of Western Balkan. We help them. Just because you said, unless we are all vaccinated, we are not safe, and there will be still one or the other variant of the coronavirus, this pandemic. And I hope that the Greece alphabet has enough letters in order to accommodate all those new variants that apparently pop out every now and then. But if you look now, this natural crisis, and I think colleague can confirm that, whenever there is a fire in Cyprus or Greece or Macedonia or flood anywhere or earthquake, I mean, we're all instantly texting, do you need help? And we send this help, which was not the case 2 years ago. Now we started to appreciate what does it mean, solidarity. And it's an instant call. We have to help, because you know that if it will happen to you as well, the colleague will call you and say, do you need help?
So the pandemic has brought the region closer together, certainly a positive side product and effect of an otherwise very dismal health situation. Let's hope we don't have to exhaust all Greek letters in the alphabet, otherwise we'll be here for quite some time. Minister Silva, do you feel that, would you concur that this pandemic has brought, aside from the world, has brought the region closer together?
At least the north shore of the region. Of course, the way the Europeans proceed was really exemplary. It's paradigmatic. And it shows the importance of the European Union as such. Unfortunately, there are countries that are not rich, but Portugal is not a rich country. But there are countries that are not rich and prefer to spend their public money, for instance, in arms, more than in health. So this is also a problem of institutions, of the quality of political institutions, because as Portugal is not a rich country, we decided to spend more in health, and we had to decide to spend less in other domains of our national budget. And we all did the same. So there are options that have to be done. And some of the countries that experience severe difficulties with access to vaccination did not follow the same rationale. Still, the level of cooperation of Europe with other regions, with its neighborhood, is relatively weak, and we have to improve it. We decided to allocate more 100 million doses to Africa and Latin America, but still this is not enough to protect Europe, because the point is to be protected. Europeans need that the world can be protected as well in terms of vaccination.
Absolutely. Clearly a lot of lessons to be learned. Being mindful of the time, I think we have approximately half an hour left from what I understand. I want to bring you in, of course, because we have a lot of expertise here on stage. I think that it goes without saying, but I know looking into the audience and knowing some of you, we also have a lot of expertise in the audience that I would like to make use of. And I'm going to come to you in just a moment, so be ready. I want to end this circle amongst us before we open up for Mr. Dendias by talking about China for a second. We talked about the retrieval of the United States, and I think you don't have to be an international politics expert to know that the huge clash in the 21st century is shaping up to be the US versus China. Now, China, of course, is gaining grounds in Europe, is gaining grounds in the region through ports like Piraeus, for instance, through its Road and Belt Initiative. Is that something that we as Europeans, that we as Mediterraneans ought to be worried about, or is that something that we should be welcoming?
Well, let's call it a challenge, not a conflict. Of course, China is a powerful actor. They're coming into the scene. I have to say, most of us were under the impression, the United States included, that China, through economic growth, will gradually evolve to the way we understand democracy. Clearly, that has not happened, that is for sure. But may I tell you a rather funny story having to do with the port of Piraeus? The Costco Pacific, in the beginning, acquired a small part of the port of Piraeus. And then Greece entered into this huge circle of crisis, the 10-year crisis, so it was obligatory for us to privatize. And one thing we had to privatize was the remaining port of Piraeus. And because of the country risk, at that time, no risk committee, either in the United States or in Europe, accepted this asset as a potential investment. So only Costco Pacific appeared. And we were flagging this to our European partners, we were flagging this to the United States. I myself said this to Minister Schäuble, who at the time was the Minister of Finance in Germany. I thought, look, it's only them. If you accept that, fine. But if not, please look. And nobody cared. So the Chinese took the port. Oh, fine. After 2 or 3 years, everybody now is coming. Piraeus, yes. Everybody comes, knocks at our door, say, why did you give the port to the Chinese? Whether it was obligatory to privatize it. Unless, we wouldn't have privatized it, we're not getting the loan from the European Union, which is essential for our survival. Why I'm saying that? It's a perfect example of the short-sightedness of the Western world. So there are grounds to cooperate with China, but we have to understand the challenges involved in that cooperation and really look forward, but with open eyes.
Of course, by all means.
Because I could tell you a similar story. This is very important to remind, not to blame anyone, but first of all to say that we don't accept moral lessons from the others. And secondly, and most importantly, we cannot repeat the same mistakes we did in Afghanistan in our next, let's say, entrepreneurship for international security. In the case of Portugal, this was not a port, but the main shareholder of our national electricity utility is a Chinese company. By the way, it behaves abiding to all the Portuguese and European applicable laws. No problem with that. But this happens in 2013 or 2014, because at that time, like Greece, we were under the Troika assistance program. We were obliged to privatize our public electricity utility, and no European company presented a bid that could be accepted to the tender that we organized, obliged by Troika. So we don't accept any lessons from those that at that time did not want to present a build and now want to criticize. They have no moral authority to criticize. Either Greece or Portugal and other countries can tell the same story.
So I see a pattern emerging here, clearly.
No. The only thing I'm worried is about the next future, not about past. Past is with the historians. But regarding the next future, I don't believe that if we frame the geopolitics of the 21st century as a clash between the United States and China, a clash between the United States and Russia, a triangular clash between the United States, Russia, and China. I don't believe if we do that, we can proceed as it is our duty and responsibility. And that's why the autonomy of Europe is very important. Europe is not a minor partner in this geopolitics.
Though to be fair, I think the clash is not, we're not creating it on stage, and nor is Europe labeling it as such. I think Beijing and US are doing it quite for themselves. There's nothing that we're not fueling fire to the table. But before I go into the audience, just a brief remark from all of you on China, because there is, of course, a balance that Europe and the region has to strike about upholding its values, which we have talked about excessively on the leaders panel yesterday, but also looking out for its economic interests.
You know, Ali, we need to be realist. I mean, we are living in an anarchic international order. Each country is working through its foreign policy, economic policy to achieve its geostrategic ambitions. So instead of rightly or wrongly criticize China or other countries for what they are doing, it's much more important as a European Union to see what we are doing. And I'll give you an example. Augusto knows much better than myself about Africa. The European Union is the #1 donor in Africa. If we go to Africa and ask, is the European Union the most important partner for Africa? The answer will be no. So we need to find why, despite the fact that we are the #1 donor in Africa, we are not considered to be the most important partner. So first of all, we need to discuss internally and not criticize what rightly or wrongly what other countries are doing.
Minister Logar and Minister Bartolo, to wrap up the China question and then go into the audience.
Well, what's the main difference between China and democratic world, for example? We are all on a scene at least every 4 years. So are you elected or you are not? If you're not, somebody else take over. Have to go with its strategy. What is in China? You have centuries of thinking the same or in the same direction, no matter who is, there's always one ideology. And it's very simple to plan geostrategical, let's say, goals you want to achieve if you have unlimited space of time. And these are two very vivid examples. For example, China is the fifth most biggest investor in Portugal due to the Troika program, at least partly. So they knew they want to enter. While with the European Union, it's not very, let's say often, that would think few commission mandates in advance in order to put its footprint there. So I think this geostrategical thinking should be included in our foreign policy.
So Europe ought to be less short-sighted and have a long-term vision, regardless of who's in power and regardless of ideologies, if I hear you correctly. Minister Bartolo.
With China. We were one of the first from the Western world to go to China and to recognize China, practically at the same time of the United States. These 50 years, we've been treated with respect. And I think we need to learn something from that as well. They are the biggest, obviously the largest country in the world. We're among the smallest. What we feel is that there's an African proverb which says that when two elephants fight, the grass gets hurt. And none of us here are coming from elephant countries. And we must not get caught in this clash. But we must respect China. It doesn't mean that we have to be naive or we accept, but they must be treated with respect. And in the sense of treated with respect, that, for example, when we talk about human rights, and we have every right to talk about human rights, and I repeat, even sticking to the principles of the United Nations Charter, there is political, social, and economic rights. Let's talk about all of them, because when it comes to social and economic rights and lifting people out of poverty, China have a thing or two to teach the rest of the world. So I'm not saying let's respect, because respect doesn't mean agreeing, but to treat with, and we shouldn't be arrogant.
And perhaps even humility in times like these. Sometimes
we need to recover. We need to discover what humility means in diplomacy again.
And I think that's a perfect segue to go to the audience. We have approximately 25 minutes left. I think that's plenty of time to get some voices, some opinions. I already see we have some questions. Do we have a microphone? Yes, the gentleman here in the first row. Please introduce yourself quickly and state your questions as briefly and precise as possible.
Yeah, addressing these China issues, I'm representing the German industry, Federation of German Industry, Wolfgang Niedermark is my name. We are advocating for a concept of a responsible coexisting in respect with other nations who have different systems, but drawing red lines, for example, human rights, where we think we cannot go without any sanction or negative comment. Example might be Xinjiang. Does it sound plausible to you, and the question goes to everyone here, that we live together with very different people, with very different systems, but still have a certain threshold where we stop cooperation and go into conflict situations when we think now the human rights issue or any other issue which might occur is too serious and we cannot be quiet about it. Does it sound plausible for you?
Yeah, please, go ahead.
On this, because I'm really passionate about it. I think self-righteous crusading will not help anyone, not even the ones who we want to help. And this idea of having a summit of democracy and to organize the democratic clan in the world, which apparently, according to Freedom House, makes us only 20% of the people living on this planet are living in a democracy according to the criteria of Freedom House. How are we going to deal with the other 80%? Do we declare war on the 80%? Will that promote human rights? Is that the way to promote human rights? I think the best way to promote human rights, first of all, is to look at our own shortcomings, starting from my own country, and even having the humility of Joe Biden saying, listen, after the Capitol riot, that democracy is fragile and it needs to be maintained. And if we follow what's happening in the United States, we know that there's a lot of work to be done. So instead of preaching to you and moralizing of what you should do in your human rights, we should lead by example and engage, because I think we should also reflect about, are sanctions effective? Because this headlong rush into sanctions, without stopping a bit to think, from what I know, first of all, it's very difficult to hurt China through sanctions. Remember, we're dealing with a country which is the major trading partner of more than half the countries in the world. In other cases, with sort of not so strong countries, one of the effects of sanctions has been to actually strengthen those countries and what they didn't have before. They started producing it themselves, and then will harden their positions. I don't think it's the best way to go. I agree we should have our principles, we should have our values, we should talk about them, but we should ask ourselves whether what we have embarked upon is the best way to go about it.
As I'm very eager to squeeze in as many questions as possible, unless anyone is even more passionate than Minister Bartolo on the stage on the issue, if it's all right, I'll just go and take some more questions so we can get a variety in. Gentlemen here in the first row and then right behind you. Yes, please introduce yourself.
Mediterranean European presidency, that our region will be a priority. It is a priority, but I mean in a concrete manner. You are the first partner for us in trade and economic. Portugal, Italy, Spain, France, Germany even. But what we are looking for is that to respect the voice and to listen for the South Mediterranean side. That means that we want to keep our youth, we want to build our economy, we want to have this partnership on win-win situation. I was interested by this idea of spirit of Helsinki. Yes, it's good, it's a good idea. But concretely, is it this will be an instrument, we hope so, to resolve the core problem in the region, which is the Middle East conflict. That is what I want to hear. But coming to the migration, we are also a country of destination of migrants coming from sub-Saharan countries. Oppression, a lot of people coming, but we are living with. And we are stopping them, we are taking back them to their homeland, but also to help their origin, the countries of origin, to keep their youth because they need them. That's the migration will be among us in the Mediterranean. Just not to talk about the oppression coming, but how we can use this mobility of human as a positive agenda. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for your intervention. I think your remarks have been well received, and the idea that Minister Bartolo stated about a conference, perhaps Bled Strategic Forum, has been known to make some waves. So who knows? Right there, gentlemen. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you. At first, I would like to thank Minister Logar for organizing a so beautiful panel, so prestigious panel. Thank you. We are talking of geostrategy.
Could you introduce yourself quickly?
Oh, sorry. I am the president of the World Diplomatic Academy. I am ambassador to UNESCO and FAO. We are talking of geostrategy. So it means that the final point of our discussions must be stability and peace. And during the pandemic and after the pandemic, time has come for realpolitik and leaving dogmatism aside. And we have in Mediterranean a crucial point for stability and for peace, which is the Cyprus issue. And I would like to ask to the ministers who are here, what do they see as a prospect for this crisis? I was a little bit attending the discussions in Geneva last May. Nothing came out as usual. And it is 54 years that this crisis is like a mortgage on Cyprus. What is the future? How do we get out of that? Thank you, Minister.
Thank you indeed for bringing up a conflict that has been, some said frozen conflict, some say it's plagued the region, and something that I'm sure not a day goes by, Minister, that you don't get asked about. So.
And that is why I didn't raise the issue during my intervention.
Right.
But thank you very much. I really appreciate your question, and you are right. I mean, we need to solve the Cyprus problem, because without solving the Cyprus problem, there is an issue in the Mediterranean. And as I mentioned during my introductory remarks, the regional cooperation that takes place in the Eastern Mediterranean, we are working on a positive agenda without excluding any country, and we want Turkey to be part of this regional cooperation. Because as you know very well, we cannot change geography. We will always be neighbors with Turkey, and we want to work together with Turkey and, of course, all the countries of the region. By the end of September, all of us were going to be in New York for the UN General Assembly, and we're expecting from the UN Secretary General, Mr. Guterres, who is doing excellent work on the Cyprus problem, to call all parties to participate in a meeting in order to see how we can resume negotiations. I have to tell you that during the last round of negotiations that ended in Crans-Montana in July 2017, we came very close to the solution of the Cyprus problem for the first time ever, and we are looking forward for the resumption of the talks from the point that they will stop in Crans-Montana in order to reach a solution based on the UN Security Council resolutions, solution for bizonal, bicommunal federation. Thanks.
Minister Dendias, I'm sure you have a thing or two to say about the Cyprus issue.
I think Nikos addressed them. The only thing I would like to say, sir, you said that the last Geneva talks were as bad as ever. The truth is it was worse, because it was the dialogue of the death, because we had a new Turkish Cypriot leadership which started lecturing us what was happening in the 60s, the 50s, the 40s, instead of coming back, as Nikos said, to the Crans-Montana status and try to build constructively something forward. So the question is, can we really figure it out that in a way that we can move forward? Because the Cyprus issue is perfectly solvable. It's perfectly solvable. But you have to, in order to solve it, it has to be in the environment of the 21st century, not in the 19th century environment. Zones of influence, armies here and there, bases here and there, fleets going back and forth with their cannons. No, that is the past. And it's not good even for Turkey, if I may say so. It's not good for Turkey. Turkey is too big to be ignored. And we would love Turkey to come within this understanding that is being formed in the Mediterranean, especially in the Southeast Mediterranean. But they have to understand it's not us to teach them. They're much bigger than we are, where their interest lies. We believe that is within the values of the Western societies, democracy, and a close relation with the European Union.
Do you share some sense of optimism, perhaps, some positive outlook that this actually can be resolved within a foreseeable time? Yes. I mean, this has over 4 decades now. It's a plague to you, it's a plague to Turkey, it's a plague to Cyprus.
I think that it is the interest, the benefits of resolving are so obvious now. They're becoming more and more obvious by the day that in the end of the day, I think a solution will be found, yes. And by the way, you have to be an optimist to be a politician. No?
Well, there you go. Do we have more interventions, questions from the audience? I thought I had seen a hand up there, but perhaps that's already been answered. It doesn't seem to be the case, so I guess being mindful of the time, we have 10 minutes left anyway, so perhaps we can wrap up with a closing segment about, and perhaps I'll start with you. Yes, of course. No, even if this is what we're here about, even if it's a dialogue, but go ahead.
What do you think of the impact of the Abraham Accord on the global security in the Mediterranean?
Right. So we already talked about new players in the region. We talked about the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and the Abraham Accords, of course, a historic agreement that are having an impact on the issue. Who wants to? Yes, please. Please. We'll do Minister Silva and then Minister Dendias. And,
thank you very much. I must say that I consider the Abraham Accords, the normalization between some Arab countries and Israel, step forward, a positive step that needs now to be complemented with other steps. Of course, the nature of the current government and the compromise on which the current government in Israel is founded is very strange, and it means a postponement of the Israeli-Palestinian issue for the forthcoming months from the point of view of Tel Aviv. But we as the European Union, we can do things that I think are important. So I must say that I advocate for the launching of the Association Council meeting between the European Union and Israel. We have a Council Association that is not having any kind of meetings. And at the same time, I also advocate the implementation of an Association Council with the Palestinian Authority. And of course, we need to work with other important stakeholders in the area, because this normalization of the relations between Israel and certain Arab states are important elements and positive elements, as I said, but are not sufficient and not enough to put the very root cause of many of the conflicts in the Mediterranean at the center of our table. So we can do something within the European Union. We are not that united towards this issue, but at least we can take some moves that could influence in the positive sense the scene in respect to this conflict.
Minister Dendias, short remarks for the gentleman.
I have to say we were very happy with the Abraham Accords as Greece. And we believe it is the epitome of a new architecture in the region, which becomes evident by them. Because in the past, you very well know, the division line was Israel versus the Arabs, and the other countries addressed themselves accordingly. The Abraham Accords show that there's a new architecture, a totally new architecture. And we describe it mostly as the reasonable versus the unreasonable. And I have to say that this is very, very promising for the future. And we would like also to bring other actors within the Eastern Mediterranean, important actors, for example, India. The Foreign Minister of India is going to be here tomorrow and address our meeting. And also even beyond that, okay, even the better. And even beyond that, countries that understand international law of the sea, and in the same way that we do. So it is very, very important, and thank you so much for the question.
All right, thank you indeed. To wrap up, Minister Logar, I think I speak for all here when I say this has been a very lively debate. We've been able to touch upon many, many aspects and points pertaining to the Mediterranean. What is the one issue that you take away with you from this panel discussion? One lesson, perhaps, one revelation, perhaps one thought that might play part in your future dealings?
Well, as we tackled so many issues here, and on quite of some we have similar views. So what I'm grasping for this discussion is that we shall enhance and, let's say, more activate the cooperation between the Med-9 countries. So now, for example, like it used to be this olive group, one as well foreign minister had their role in this group in the Mediterranean region. Well, one should consider of activating the group as well on the ministerial level and as well on the administrative level. As now it's summits of heads of state, I think that foreign ministers as well have something to say, to have their own share in, let's say, discussing the issues that are important for the countries from the region.
Minister Christodoulides, your main takeaway, that one main takeaway from this discussion, I know many to pick from, but if you had to pick one.
Besides welcoming Slovenia and Croatia in the Med-7 group, I think as Mediterranean EU member states, we need to work together in order for the European Union to show much more concrete interest about Mediterranean, because we believe this is not the case today. And this is also the perception of the non-EU member states in the Mediterranean. And I was glad to hear before the ambassador of Algeria.
Yeah, Minister Silva, that one main takeaway, want to bring you all in before I wrap up.
We agree on the agendas and actions plan that we approved. It's time to implement them.
Minister Bartolo?
It's important to engage with our partners as equal partners. I agree totally with what Nikos said that in his first statement. We should not have any superiority complex when we deal with them. And words and attitudes are not enough, then even when it comes to economic and trade links. Do we want our North African partners and African partners to simply be exporters of fruit or vegetables, and then we process them ourselves, and then we expect them to create enough jobs and wealth not to cross over? So let's treat them and respect them seriously. And just one last thing that I would really like to stress is, let's learn a bit about their culture, their history, and their geography. Because sometimes even some of the speeches that I heard here terrified me, as if all people from across the sea are ISIS and they must not contaminate our continent. That is really terrible.
So appeal to broaden one's own horizon when it comes to the world outside of Europe, which sometimes we get very immersed with our own problems and issues. Minister Dendias, you have the final remark of this panel.
Thank you, sir, for the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would say the Mediterranean is the geographical point of geopolitical maturity of the European Union. It will prove if the European Union has decided or will decide to become a world actor or just an observer.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mediterranean geostrategic chessboard. I think all the layers, all the factors and all the issues pertaining to the region were laid out in detail throughout the past 90 minutes. Nothing was unspared. All gloves were off, and I appreciate the candor. I appreciate the honesty that you have come here with to share the issues, not to sugarcoat them, but to name the sickening issues that this region has to abide by. I think I speak for all when I say it has been a very lively discussion, very educating indeed. And ministers, I thank you for your participation. This is your applause. Thank you so much. Thank you.